to the SQL injection part. So here I'll be explaining what SQL injection is and how it works. So SQL injection is one of the most used and the most common web-based attack, and this actually needs a web application that uses a database that we have already seen. So what it does is it fetches the information from the database and shows the results to the user who actually entered the username and the password, for example. So when this user actually enters the username and the password, an SQL query is generated on the actual PHP web app itself, and that SQL query is sent to the database. And this query is executed on the database, and any relevant information is returned back to the web application and shown to the user. So this is the typical normal scenario. So what is SQL injection? What we are going to do in SQL injection is we are going to manipulate this database query in order to make it do something that it's not supposed to do. So we change this SQL query, send it to the database, and then get the results that shouldn't be viewed. So this is a very high level overview of what SQL injection is. So to put it more formally, SQL injection is a code injection technique that's used to execute malicious SQL statements. So now let's see how it works. So here I have an image which I pulled from Google. So it has a web page with a username and a password. So as a user on this web page, the only place where we can enter data is this username and the password entry boxes. So when we enter the username and the password, the whole web app, it generates the SQL query and sends it to the database. So here we are the user or the hacker. We send or we enter the username and the password in the web app, and then it sends and it creates an SQL query, sends it to the database, processes it on the database, and returns the results onto the web app, and we can view it. So let me move on to the next slide here. So we are entering the credentials. So this is an example on what a pre-generated SQL statement is. So we enter the username and the password. So the user ID and the password are shown in red. So this is the only place where we can enter where as a user we can enter something. So this is an example. So select star from users. Users is a table on the database where the username is equal to the user ID that we entered here, and the password is equal to the password that we entered here. So this pre-generated SQL statement is sent to the database. Is sent to the database, and then it executes it on the database, returns the results, and we can see it. Now, how are we going to manipulate this SQL query? So we manipulate this SQL query in order to return a true. So only when the username and the password is matching in the database, it returns true and is authenticated. So how can we make sure that this statement always returns true? Is by using OR gate or an OR logic gate. So it's nothing major. In the OR logic gate, what happens is there are two inputs, A and B, and there is an output. So if the two inputs are false, the result is a false. Any other cases, it's true. So irrespective of whether so it means like if one of the inputs is true, then the output is always true. So we are going to modify the SQL query where we are going to have something which returns true always, like this one is equal to 1. Obviously 1 is equal to 1, which is true. So how are we going to incorporate that into this SQL query so it returns true always? Is, for example, this one. So select star from users where the username is equal to this particular code. So I'll explain what happens here. So this first apostrophe, the red color apostrophe, is to close the string. What that means is whatever you enter into the username here, whatever you enter into this username, it's given as a string. So the first thing we do is we close that string, which means the username is just a null string. We have nothing inside there. So the next one is the OR gate, and 1 is equal to 1. So now as 1 is equal to 1 always returns true, this whole string always returns true. So we have finally achieved a place where we can always return a true irrespective of whatever the username is. For example, here the username is just a null string. What are these two dashes? These two dashes is to comment out the rest of the SQL statement. So that way we don't even need a password because we have already commented out the rest of the SQL statement. So this whole SQL query is now going to return us a true. So once you pass this through, then the authentication is achieved and login is successful. So this is just a basic to see if there is an SQL vulnerability or not, SQL injection vulnerability or not. So in the labs, we'll see more codes, more SQL codes manipulated, different versions on how we can enter it in the username and the password sections and how we can get much more information.